Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this new webinar entitled NIH NIAID Network Refinement Protocol Funds Revisited. I'm joined today by three colleagues from the Division of AIDS and Division of Extramural Activities. Mary Kirker, all of you are very familiar with, as the former Director of Grants Management, our Grants Management Officer. I'm also joined by Emily Lindy, our current Grants Management Officer, and Bola Jenny from the Division of AIDS. So I will go ahead and begin with some background. So the next several slides are ones we used earlier in February at the previous webinars. And fundamentally what we are in the process of doing is a twofold process. We are helping to set the research agenda. We're also announcing today two pilots that will help us to refine and improve, or test to see if we can improve how we manage the clinical trials enterprise. So as you are all aware, every 7 years NIH must competitively renew its AIDS network and its funding, and that gives us the opportunity to address the development of a new scientific agenda and advance the scientific agenda. So for now, what we're seeking to do with you is to create a forward-looking agenda that will determine the focus and priorities for the clinical trials networks through 2027. The research agenda largely has been set by the NIH director who on 2015 created these high-level areas, high-priority areas of AIDS research, including reducing incidence through PrEP and vaccines, discovering the next generation of therapies and developing a cure, and improving the prevention and treatment of the HIV-associated comorbidities and co-infections. So as we build toward the future, we're seeking to define the highest priority research questions that will help us create, establish, and validate the most impactful interventions to improve both prevention and treatment. We are seeking to foster stakeholder input into these scientific directions, and that includes not just researchers, but also community and advocacy groups. And at the same time, we will intend to move to a clinical site model that involves the ability for NIAID to make the sites more interoperable through a pay-as-you-go methodology to address emerging infectious disease outbreaks. At the same time, while we're seeking to create this research agenda, we're going to continue to work with you to maintain good stewardship of funds while defining processes and procedures that will seek to minimize the burden at the site, the network leadership, and at NIAID staff levels. We hope to improve practices and procedures to enhance the efficiency of clinical trials operations and create ways of simplifying and streamlining the burdens. So moving forward, all of this is based on a fundamental principle, and that is that NIAID is ultimately responsible for the oversight of all the funds we award, including protocol funds. And so that is the basis of at least the two pilots we're here to talk to you today about. I'll now turn the microphone over to Mary Kirker, who will introduce the two pilots, and then she will introduce her colleagues. Thank you.
Oops, excuse me. Okay, so let's start with what the two pilots actually are. The first pilot is going to be looking at providing ongoing participant PF in the CTUs rather than in the LOC. We would put it, the NIAID would put it into the award to the CTUs. That's pilot number one. And pilot number two is looking at the standardization of PF expenses within and across the networks, and looking at the possibility of implementing capitation models. I'm going to go back. These are sort of the goals of the PF pilot, but I'm going to repeat something Carl just mentioned, which is who's responsible, who has a major responsibility role in this, and that's why these are goals for these two pilots. NIAID is responsible for the oversight of all funds awarded, including protocol funds. So please take the 5 goals that are on the next 2 slides within that context, that you need to think in terms of that context. The first one is to improve NIAID's oversight of PF support, that we will be able to have a distinction between ongoing and new, so we will be able to make those evaluations based on sort of what we understand and realize are going to be expenses that we have no matter what, because we have ongoing participants in study as well, and then take that into consideration as we're looking at new protocols or new participants in ongoing studies. We also hope this will help us enhance planning. So we're looking at some way of actually looking, engaging, and evaluating the forecasting that's done for PF, both for ongoing as well as for new participants. So we as an NIAID will be looking at that. In addition, this will actually help the CTUs and the CRFSs, the people who are doing the work on the ground, understand the amount of money they should be receiving or have received, and what we're expecting that money to go to cover. The third one is to increase consistency. I think what we're looking at is a means of trying to develop funding strategies, as well as coming up with a better understanding of protocol costing. The last 2 are fairly easy. Those are the reducing the burden. We believe this because you're providing all the money to the CTUs for ongoing participants. It will be reducing the burden for invoicing, as well as the LOCs will be able to actually focus their activities and their thoughts and their planning around new protocols and new participants. And the last is siloing. We were hoping, especially at the CTU CRS level, there'll be greater flexibility to use the funds that they are provided to cover the expenses of all the protocols that are involved in our NIAID funded studies. With this, let me turn this over to discuss the first pilot to Emily.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about the first pilot. This pilot and the next are actually both designed to address some or all of the goals that Mary listed above. Pilot 1 will give NIAID more information on the PF costs. Remember that with the PF costs, we're talking about a very large sum of money for which NIAID has relatively little information currently, and this pilot will enhance our stewardship of those funds, as mentioned by both Mary and Carl previously. And I just want to pick out one of those goals and speak to it a little bit. When we're speaking about burden, we're not speaking about burden necessarily at each of the specific points, LOCs, CTUs, or NIAID, but we're talking about the balance of the burden for the enterprise as a whole. So all of those components taken together. We're really looking at that bigger picture when we're talking about burden. So when you listen to the details of Pilot 1, please listen in the context of the goals that were described. This logo that you see here is really just a quick depiction of what we'll be doing in Pilot 1, and in the simplest form, Pilot 1 is moving the costs for PFs for ongoing participants from the LOC award to the CTU award. I'm going to start with the CTUs and cover some of the details for the CTUs, and then I'll end with the details for the LOCs. Many of the slides that you see here will include diagrams of what we will be doing, and it's really just for the ease of comprehension and ease of conveying the message. But in FY18, what we'll be doing is splitting the PF money now awarded to the LOCs, and some of the PF will remain with the LOC award, and other PF that for ongoing participants will be awarded directly to the CTU award in that FY18 notice of award. And I'll get to the definition in the coming slides of what ongoing means. This figure represents the costs for the ongoing part of the participant costs for the new budget period, the FY18 budget period. One thing I want to underscore is what this pilot does not do is it does not change any of the handling for protocol costs in this current budget period, which is FY17. So again, what we're doing, what we would be doing here is taking any participants who are enrolled as of the end of the current budget period and have ongoing costs, and those costs for PF would be then in the CTU award. And the CTU would then distribute those costs to the CRSs. So how are we defining what ongoing participants are? It is a participant enrolled at the end of the current budget period that also has costs in the next budget period, so costs in FY18. In other words, if a participant was enrolled on or before 11/30 of this year, and they will also have costs in the coming year, those are defined as ongoing participants. NIAID will now award these costs for ongoing participants to the CTUs, who will then distribute to the CRSs affiliated with those CTUs. One thing that we will not be changing is the core costs. So just as the CTU awards in FY17 contain core funds, so will the CTU award in FY18 include core funds. The costs for all of the participants at the CTUs are actually across all of the networks. So NIAID will have conversations with each of the networks, as they do now, to talk about participants that are anticipated in the coming year. And in this case, we'll get a little bit more specific than that. But each of these networks will be providing the information for the ongoing participants, and all of those costs will be included in the FY18 CTU award. So how might you be asking, are we defining and when and where are we defining these costs and the breaks of them? So we talked a lot about this, and what we decided was the best and most natural breaking point is the budget period for the award. The budget period of the award is already something that we use in discussion. It's already the natural breaking point for where costs are reimbursed, so current costs and when you're incurring those costs and when you're reimbursing them. And it's also the date that we're already using when we're talking with the networks about projecting costs for the coming budget period. So we figured that this was a natural breaking point. So to accomplish this, we're actually going to process two award actions. So what we would do is take those participants that are identified as ongoing as of August the 31st of this year, so enrolled and will have costs in the coming year. And that portion of the award will be issued in the 12-1 NOA, so that's your regular 12-1 NOA for those CTU awards. And then in addition to that, to be sure that we get the full complement for those that are enrolled in the current budget period, we will be revising that notice of award again in March of the coming year, and that revised notice will include any participants that were enrolled after that August 31 date and before the end of the current budget period, so that next 3 months. So what this does in this 9-month, 3-month break is really give as much money as possible to the CTU up front, so to really enhance their planning. And then with the additional 3-month supplement for that gap period between August and November, that we'll go back and get those final numbers, revise the award in March and include those. And then that means that the FY18 award then at the CTU has any ongoing participants that were enrolled in the previous budget period. What this does not do is, again, change any costs for the 2017 award. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go into the LOCs. So what I'm going to talk about here is what remains at the LOC. So there will still be PF at the LOC. That will include all costs for protocol-specific sites, and it will also cover all new expenses. And I say new in two ways, and I'm going to repeat that. New studies, so studies that hadn't been defined before, so any new studies and expenses associated with that, and also any new participants in ongoing studies. So these would be individuals who enrolled in 2018. So those costs would be in the LOC awards. Also, any other PF costs would be included there. So you're already, we already talked a little bit in the previous slide about the natural breaking point and being the budget period. So we still intend for that to be true and to be true for our continuing discussions with the LOCs. We do realize that there may be some discussions and some changes that need to accommodate the tracking of ongoing versus new as we go forward. But again, we really want to focus on that natural breaking point of the budget period. So there's a number of questions that we'll be asking ourselves for each of these pilots. Some of them we will be asking for both of the pilots. The first thing that we'll be looking at is the impact of this change. How has it impacted the process of requesting PF support at the CTU CRS level, the process of providing PF funding at the LOC, and has it impacted the timeliness of reporting data to the DMCs? How easily were the networks able to separate these ongoing costs from new expenses and protocol participants? Are the protocol expenses underestimated? Are they overestimated? How accurate are we on estimating those protocol expenses? Has there been any change to the unobligated balances, either at the LOC or the CTU awards? So we will be looking at both of those. Are there unintended consequences or unanticipated consequences of this change? So, you know, you make changes and you do the best planning that you can, but you can't always anticipate everything. So we'll certainly be reviewing that as we go back to evaluate this pilot. And then lastly, what are the changes, what other changes can be made to ensure the appropriate stewardship of PF and also the burden at the LOCs and the CTUs and NIAID. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Mary.
Okay, so I'm talking about the second pilot. The second pilot actually is a continuation of a study that was done back in 2011 by Hank. And Hank had a working group that it brought together to talk about standardization of budgeting within networks. And one of their strong recommendations that we should we should start looking at the use of a fee-for-service or capitation models. I think we now have 5 years of experience or 6 years of experience in developing protocol costing at the network. So I think this is actually a very good time for us to start looking at this idea again. So the second pilot is looking at capitation and looking at standardization of protocol costs, especially across networks. So it really is, we are expecting that we're going to be standardizing some protocol expenses. In addition to that, we will be looking at seeing if we can do capitation as well. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what capitation actually is, and I'm going to go through the definitions that are actually in the Uniform Administrative Guidance that just came out a couple of years ago, one of my famous documents that I like to read before I fall asleep. So capitation is defined in that federal regulations as an award reimbursement based on case counts and number of beneficiaries according to the terms and conditions of a federal award. So in this particular case, it would be the number of participants times the number of costs per participant. The advantage of using a capitation award or a capitation model is that for PF is that that would mean that the cost principles probably will not, as outlined in the policy, would not apply if it's a true capitation award, which is also very helpful because it means that they can use the funds as they need for their organization and for the cost and handling of their particular clinical trial awards. So what is NIAID going to do? NIAID is going to start by convening a working group, and I think one of the things I want to make extremely clear is that we are on a very aggressive timeline to try to get some information together to try to address these questions here or develop these standards here. So one of the things that we want to look at is different standardization models or protocol models. So we would like to look at whether or not we can have standardized PF expenses across networks. We are looking at whether or not if there's a non-standard protocol specific activity, whether or not there's some way that we can standardize it within the network itself, or to know how you've come up with the standardization or the costing for those particular activities. And then to see, even if it is a specific expense for a network, can it be standardized within the network as well as within the protocols? And can it be looked at in terms of is that type of cost really unique, or is it a cost that is actually across networks just called something different? We are planning to ensure that the working group includes representation that will be able to help us determine these very specific expenses and costs. So what we're planning to do is we're planning to have representatives from NIAID, we're planning to have representatives from the network, of course, and we're actually planning to have other selected grantee stakeholders. And in most cases, it's going to be people that are from the CTUs or the CRSs. We will also be evaluating. The last three evaluation criteria are the evaluation criteria that are on the pilot one as well. Is this going to affect large unobligated balances? Is there enough changes to ensure proper stewardship, et cetera? But the first two are specific to this particular study. The first one is how much PF costing can be standardized across the networks. That's number one. And the second one is, can we look in terms of standardization in the best case scenario, moving it to cost reimbursement to a capitation reimbursement? Because remember, when you go back to the definition of capitation, if you can make it a capitation award, it means that they do not have to deal with the cost principles. So I think that that could be a savings and a burden, relieving some burden for the grantee community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bola to talk about the timelines.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon. This is Bola from the Office of Clinical Site Oversight here at the Division of AIDS. And I'm going to walk you through a series of timelines and next steps for these two pilots. But I just wanted to also state the fact that Pilot 1 will be conducted across all sites and all networks, after which we'll evaluate the process and then make some decisions about how to roll this out. So this slide is going to get very busy very quickly in the next couple of minutes as I expand on the timeline. However, one of the things that we are committed to doing throughout this process is to leaving those components within our current funding cycle that work. Basically, we don't want to fix anything that is not broken, but with the commitment of also refining or improving only those areas that have not worked as well. So this particular slide depicts some of those high-level activities that we're currently performing, but which will not change even with the implementation of these two pilots. So here's the tentative timeline for the PF Pilot 1 at the LOC. And you'll note, just as we currently do, in April 15th of 2017, we will still expect the LOCs to submit their 2018 PF recommendations to NIAID. That won't change. In June 1st of 2017, just as is currently the case, we will still provide the balance of the PF that is supposed to go to the LOCs to them, assuming that there still remains a bona fide need to do that. Again, 7/31/2017, we'll still expect the LOCs to provide NIAID with their final FY 2018 projections for the upcoming budget year. And finally, the LOC notices of award will be issued on or before December 1st of 2017. None of those activities are expected to change. But then again in 2018, we'll expect all these activities to be repeated again for the 2019 fiscal year. So basically this slide just shows that nothing in these activities will be expected to change with the implementation of the PF pilots. Now I just want to layer on top of that some of those activities which we expect will change with the implementation of these pilots. And those are the items depicted in red. So the first item we expect will be modified with these pilots is on 7/31/2017. The LOCs will provide NIAID with their FY 2018 PF projections for the upcoming year, just as they regularly do. However, with this with the implementation of these pilots, we will also expect the LOCs to then divide the new participants versus the ongoing participants by site. That is not a level of detail that they've typically provided to the NIAID. But with the implementation of this pilot, it's an expectation that we have of the LOCs. We know that some LOCs probably have this information to a certain extent, but in the coming years is what we will expect of them. In addition, on or about September 15th, 2017, we will also expect the LOCs to provide NIAID with information on the participants and the costs for the participants that were on study as of 8/31/2017. We can talk about whether or not this September 15th date is a practical date or not, but right now, tentatively, that's the date that we're suggesting that the LOCs provide that information to us. Then in December 1st of 2017, just as they regularly do now, the LOCs will receive their notices of award for the coming year. However, the notice of award will not contain the PF for the ongoing portion of the participants that are enrolled. That will be in the CTU awards. And basically, those are the four components at a high level that we expect to change with the implementation of these two pilots. So now we'll switch our attention to the CTUs for the next couple of minutes. And this is the timeline, the tentative timeline for the PF pilot for the CTUs. Just as is the case now, the CTUs will still be expected to submit their RPPRs to NIAID on October 1st, 2017. However, the NOAs for the CTUs that are issued in December, on or before December 1st, 2017, will contain not only the core, but also the PF for the ongoing participants. And I just want to stress that core is not going away. Core will still be provided within these CTU awards, but in addition to that, they will get the PF funds for the ongoing participants from the participants that were enrolled as of August 31st, 2017. Then sometime around February 1st, 2018, we will also expect that the CTUs will provide a request to NIAID for the participants that were enrolled as of November 30th, 2017. Recall in the slides that were presented earlier, we said that those participants that were enrolled between September 1st and November 30th will get a supplement for those participants in March. So this is when the CTUs will be expected to request those funds, and then the supplement will be awarded in March. And what we're expecting at this point is that it will just be a very simplified budget that will be submitted to NIAID, what we typically call the one-liner budgets, and that's the expectation from NIAID. So in summary, the top half of this very busy slide are the high-level activities, including some of the activities that we currently perform now and some that are new that we can expect with the implementation of these two pilots. So now let's focus our attention to pilot 2, the bottom half of this slide, where the purple band is. And recall that pilot 2 focuses on the standardization and the capitation initiative. So with the implementation of pilot 2, first of all was this webinar which we're conducting today, and then sometime in April, very early in April, we expect to convene a working group that Mary talked about with with our stakeholders, as well as perhaps using Hank to help us to coordinate some of these activities. And then early in 2018, we'll expect that the working group will generate a report of their recommendations to the NIAID. NIAID will review that information and come up with some determinations about the standardization and protocol costing models, with the expectation that perhaps we can roll this out either in 2019 or sometime beyond. But I think the beauty of this is that we still have some time to be able to work on these pilots, so that if adjustments need to be made, we'll be able to make them. So we recognize that some of these timelines are very aggressive, but that's the current goal, subject to some flexibility and based on your feedback, as well as actual findings from the pilots that will inform our decisions going forward. Over the next couple of weeks and months, we'll be reaching out to each of the networks and some select CTUs to evolve these models and the timelines. We have started with a framework for operationalizing this, but your input will be very important as we finalize the decisions. Some things are still unknown to us and therefore need to be worked out, and your input will be invaluable as we do this. For example, clinical trials insurance is currently awarded via the LOC awards. And with the introduction of these two pilots, it's not clear that that will continue to be what makes the most sense. So we anticipate that there are other things that we may or may not have thought about, and we look forward to partnering with you prior to rolling out the final product. And we have some time to work on this and to evaluate it as necessary prior to the 2020 grant cycle starting. So before I open this up for additional questions during this webinar, I also wanted to bring your attention to this email address that we have created. We're hoping that if you have any questions or comments in the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to send them to this email address. We'll collate the questions and comments and then post them on the website for everyone to see. If you are able to and can get questions to us before the end of this month, it will be helpful, so that the sooner we get the questions and comments, the sooner we're able to start working on some of them and provide feedback. So I just want to thank you for your attention, and then now I'm going to open it up for questions and comments. Thank you.